So I'm just absolutely honored and delighted to be in conversation with this man. Uh, I'm going to read a bit of your biography, David, just to totally embarrass you. But David Laser is an Australian journalist, author, interviewer, born in Montreal, Canada, and grew up in Sydney. In his 43-year career, David has been a Middle East and Washington, D.C. correspondent, as well as a feature writer for The Australian, HQ Magazine, The Bulletin, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Melbourne Age, the Australian Women's Weekly, and Good Weekend Magazine, which we'll be talking about. He is the recipient of several awards for his journalism, including 2 National Magazine Awards for Story of the Year, a United Nations Human Rights Commendation, an Ostcare All Media Award, and 4 Walkley nominations, including winner of the Walkley Award for Best Magazine Feature, writing for his profile of Alan Jones. A doctor of creative arts, David is author of 7 books, including his anthology of profiles, The Whites of Their Eyes, his memoir, To Begin to Know, Walking in the Shadows of My Father, shortlisted for the 2015 National Biography Award, and Women, Men, and the Whole Damn Thing, his study of patriarchy and toxic masculinity in the age of Me Too. And David, thank you so much for making time in your extraordinary day down there in Australia. You're so welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, Owen.
And you're here because you were tasked by the Good Weekend magazine, a publication of the Australian paper of record, the Sydney Morning Herald, I believe. And the editor there asked you to write a piece on your travels. The nationally esteemed author and journalist David Laser decided to write on his trip to Ireland, which you took with us. And I was absolutely delighted to see this article. It was a very provocative, a funny, interesting, and a curious article. And that's why I wanted to have a chat with you about it, because I had a few questions. I'm just going to read from the first couple of paragraphs to get us started. And really, it's in a very a sort of a kind of a pithy and sort of joking style, but I know that there's something else going on beneath these words, and that's what I'm here to ask you about. Is what were you really thinking when you were writing these words? You say, "I'm standing in an emerald valley with trails leading this way and that. There's a ring fort in the distance, blanketed in mist, and a ruined abbey up on a hill. Word has it there is also a farm nearby where the hens have been taught to pray, the Lord's Prayer, no less, and an ancient well said to cure diabetes. True, you ask? Well, it all depends on how you look at things. Certainly, it doesn't make much sense. But then again, neither does the neither does the answer to the persistent Irish question, how do I get there? Well, Jesus, the old farmer is prone to telling you, grinning down his sleeve, I wouldn't be starting from here. And of course, that gets you thinking you shouldn't be going to wherever you thought you were going, not from here anyway, and that you might as well accept you're very lost. Either that, or there's something, or there's somewhere much better to go that you haven't thought of yet. Oh dear, how to get there. One thing's for sure, it's not by using the logic of the rational mind, certainly not on the west coast of Ireland. So that's just the first opening paragraphs of around a 1,400 word article. But a fascinating opening, David. Tell me about it. I'd love to hear.
Well, I was just channeling you, Owen, really.
What's that?
I was just channeling you.
I was
Oh, come on. I
more.
mean,
Tell me more.
well, I to write is to beg and to borrow and to steal. And the better you are at concealing your theft, sometimes the better writer, songwriter you are, or I stole some ideas from literally from your retreat, the Turse and Dunham retreat that I went on, and that idea of how do I get there? I think it's something that you actually posed to us. And that ideal, I wouldn't be starting from here, is just so quirkish and lovely and mischievous, um, and confounding all at the same time. And it begs us to think in non-rational ways, to think in non-linear, non-rational ways, be more instinctive. And so, I was just kind of trying to absorb some of the things that I had learned and felt during that beautiful week with you and your mother, Lauren, and your brother, Molly, Michael. Um, and so I was just trying to set this scene up, which was really um, what I was thinking, what I was feeling was we live in a rational world and a world of increasing polarization and sharp divisions. I mean, it's just an acid bath we could drown in. Um, and there's something about that trip with you and the west coast of Ireland and any kind of apprehension of the non-rational world, which takes us to different truths. And so that's kind of what I was hoping to get at in my beginning.
And what do you think is the value of that, David? Why is that important? I mean, surely we should be after the rational, the things that make sense, the straight road to our destination. I mean, isn't that what we're all seeking? So why is this important in Ireland? Why is this confusing and befuddling a mischievous experience important?
Well, because I don't think we're ever going to get there through the rational voice or the logical path. I think that what did Einstein say? That there's an optical illusion of consciousness, which is our separation. So we're all kind of wedded to this larger public conversation, which and the media is very much at fault here, but not just the media, but where we highlight our differences, we highlight our otherness, and we focus on our otherness, and there's plenty of scientific evidence to point to how the brain responds to those who are different. But just behind the veil of those differences is um, something quite wondrous, which is the brotherhood and sisterhood of us all, that we're all connected, that we're all bound together in a common humanity. And we're talking today, the day after an assassin tried to take out Trump. And I'm reminded of that saying that, if you go for the king, don't miss. Um, and we're talking a day after scores of people were killed yet again in Gaza. And we're talking in the midst of the ongoing bombardment of Ukraine and the painful divisions that we see across countries, whether in France or Britain or United States or here in Australia. And it's very easy to get stuck on that. It's very easy to just cleave to the divisions, and have our whole biochemistry, our whole kind of disposition towards life informed by those divisions until you're taken beyond that. And it can be through dance, or it can be through music, or it can be through ancient wisdoms, or it can be through, shamanic methods, or it can be through a retreat like yours. And this is just to tell people who might be listening, I am not on a commission here to promote you, but promote you I will. That I think we're all hungry for the opportunity to find our connectedness. We're hungry for the opportunity to dissolve the differences and to actually experience unity consciousness. And I think that the west coast of Ireland is one of the loveliest places to experience that, because stories and legends and fables and riddles still live in the collective imagination.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I end up talking about this so much that, I mean, obviously I'm from Ireland. Everybody loves, well, not necessarily, but local pride is a very natural human impulse, perhaps a sociologically evolved one, that you're proud of the place where you live and where you call your home. And so I'm always very conscious of that. Coming from Ireland, and I spend my life telling people what you're talking about, almost not to the same extent that Ireland can almost be a cure for a lot of the ills of the world, or how a cure for how the ills of the world burden us. But certainly Ireland has always been a place over the centuries, the decades, the centuries, even the millennia, one could conjecture, a place that people have gone geographically. It was at the edge of the ancient known world. And so there's some kind of energy there that when the ancient mind looked out at the horizon west, we did not know what was beyond there, not with any surety. And you have that sense of threshold and horizon and staring into an unknown where the sun has set, mixed with this miraculous geography of this island in one of the harshest oceans of the world, the North Atlantic. Really inhospitable place. And yet, because of this Gulf Stream that North America very generously pushes over our direction, the Gulf Stream keeps Ireland temperate throughout even the darkest winter up there. And so you have this extraordinarily lush and abundant vegetation. You mentioned in your article that you were sleeping beside a rhododendron forest.
I mean, how magical is that? How magical, just to say the words, I slept on the edge of a rhododendron forest. I mean, it's too beautiful for words, really.
And you're a great expert on Ireland too throughout your life. Ireland has always been a place that has captured your imagination. So tell us a bit more about why you think Ireland has been that place for you and for many people over the history of that place. Tell us a bit more about that. Why Ireland, do you think?
Well, I mean, just to slightly correct you, I have not always been
Mm.
in the thrall of Ireland. I think it came to me as a young father. My daughters at that time were 6 and 2, respectively, and I was working for the Sydney Morning Herald, and I was burnt out from the stresses of that job, and I needed a break. And I thought, well, where would I go? And we thought about, I had a chance of coming to Dublin and working there for the Sydney Morning Herald, and I decided not to. But the reason I was drawn to Ireland was because 2 years before we'd taken our daughters we wanted to go somewhere green. We wanted to go somewhere child friendly, and I'd been to England many, many times, and like many people, I think, had just not gone to Ireland. I mean, I don't know why that was. It was just a failure of imagination on my part. And when we got there, I thought, what on earth have I been doing going to England all these years? You know, the trek from Sydney to London or Australia to London is a well-worn path. Young Australians would backpack and they'd end up in London. They wouldn't end up in Dublin. And I got to Ireland. This is the early 90s, and we rented a house down in Cork, down in Baltimore, on the edge of a cliff. It was one of the most windswept, wild, impoverished places then. And but it was extraordinary. And one day we went to an island off the coast of off the south coast of Ireland. It was, you couldn't go any more south. You were away, you end up in Algeria. Um, and we met a guy there from the Ministry of Culture. And he was just there to see whether there were any books in the library. There was 200 people who lived on this island. Were there books in the library, and did the swings and the round and the merry-go-round, did those things work in the playground? And I said, well, really, who sent you here? He said, well, the Minister for Culture. And he said, you know, and I love to try and pretend that I'm an Irishman, so I'm going to give you my Irish accent. He said, look, as the minister says, if you colonize the imagination, you've got nothing left. And I just heard those words. I thought, you would never hear a bureaucrat or a politician in Australia talk about the colonization of the imagination and talk about the value of the books in that little library where a population of 200 people would access them. And I just thought, who are these people? So it was then that I started, you know, we're talking now 20 years ago, no, 30 years ago, where I started my appetite for the Irish, all things Irish. I began to read the Irish novelists, you know. At the time, it was John McGahn and John Banville, and I'd read Joyce before, and I'd read Beckett before, and then you know, more latterly the Claire Keegans and the Paul Murrays and the Sebastian Barrys, and I mean on and on and on it goes. And I'd loved Irish music, but then I started listening more to Irish music. I went to Northern Ireland and reported on the Troubles. It was sort of before the Good Friday Agreement and after the Good Friday Agreement. I covered a murder trial in Belfast. So I was seeing, you know, a number of, or feeling or accessing a number of aspects of the Irish experience. And all the time thinking, there's something really familiar to me about the Irish, even though I have not a drop of Irish blood in me. You know, both my parents are Jewish, my grandparents are Jewish, and it's just Jewish all the way up and down my bloodline. But I started to feel like there was a lot that, if we can just divorce everything to do with Israel in this conversation and just look at Jewish culture and the culture of storytelling and humor and being, you know, the wanderings and the persecutions and the exile of the Jewish people. There was so much, and the love of words, the love of language, the love of music, so much overlap. And you and I have talked about this privately, Owen, that I became increasingly drawn to the Irish in their own right, but also to the nexus between the Irish and the Jewish people in some ways. And I think you pointed out to me how fascinating it is. The most significant character in Irish fiction would be a Jew, Leopold Bloom from Ulysses. So all of that is part of my fascination for the Irish. And also um, and this is unlike the culture that I've come from. And when I say I come from a Jewish culture, I'm very much an Australian secular Jew, and and but the way the music builds, um, you go to any pub in Ireland, and it starts off with a guitar or a fiddle, and then by the time anyone who's gone to Ireland knows that. It's just something I've never experienced before. Every person or second person is a musician or a songwriter or a singer or a poet. So that speaks to me, and it speaks to the depth and the beauty of Irish culture. And that's a very long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
But what's fascinating is, I mean, I'm asking myself these questions all the time and I can't find answers. And so if I think someone like yourself, so worldly and well informed and so well studied in world history, international relations, contemporary international politics, the inner workings of how these systems play out intimately in your own family story as well as on the grand chessboard, of international relations. And yet you are very aware of this something, an ineffable something, actually, is what I'm gathering, is that it's actually ineffable, it's unsayable, it can't be articulated in a way. There's a simply an embodied experience that happens, and it is that it happens in the body. It's pre-linguistic, and it's experiential, and it is everything that the rational mind isn't. um, and for some reason, I think that's about as far as I'm able to go. That's as far as words will take me. Um, what do you think of that way of putting it? Which isn't a way of,
I
yeah.
I love the way you're putting it. I mean, I think the Zen masters would agree with you that, um, and any of the great sages of history, that beyond words, there are truths that we can only apprehend through um, through something that does not submit to kind of rational, logical um, construction of sentences or wordplay or whatever. I mean, we're endlessly looking for the words to describe the ineffable, and I love that play. And that's why I love reading poetry, and that's why songwriting is, because we're all poets and songwriters, and it's a mystical exercise, and um, I feel I feel like I get it. I get at this. I get at this at the truths of who we are and where we are and our connectedness to all things only occasionally. And it's only ever a bodily experience. It's like, ha, suddenly the walls come down, and the person who I thought was my um my adversary, or the person who I thought I had judgment about or ill will towards, um, is actually, I love that expression, we're all just walking each other home. Like we're all made of this broken timber, as Immanuel Kant said. We're all kind of in our brokenness and our humanness, all seeking the same thing. We're seeking we want to be loved, we want to belong, we want to be protected, we want shelter. The Maslow's hierarchy. We want all of those things, and there are so many things that bind us together in our common humanity. And this is where I think actually concerts go some way towards That's where I felt it often most. Um, anyone who's ever been at a concert and I mean, I was at a U2 concert once in Sydney, and there were, I don't know, 70 or 80,000 people. And everyone, to a man, woman, and child, practically was singing I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, as one, as a kind of cathedral, epic cathedral moment. And in that moment, it's like something just falls away and we're all bound together. And I think that's what we're looking for. And I think when you go to the west coast of Ireland, and when you go to, sorry, I'm going to spruik you again. When you go to a retreat like yours or our friend David White's, um, you you are taken into realms through portals that help me leave behind many of the afflictions of the modern world, um, which uh, it's hard. We're living in a infinitely complex, hard-boiled, um, difficult times. And the earth is being ravaged, and the world feels like it's just teetering on the edge of something. And in my worst moments, I think, well, is this the end of days? Is this and then in my better moments, I think, no, actually, it's the end of something, and it's the beginning of something else. And what's that something else? And the something else is a new consciousness. That's what's calling forth, is a new consciousness. And that is suffused with hope and courage. How and what is that new consciousness? Well, it requires of us actually, you know, let's go back to Trump's near assassination yesterday. There was a part of me that thought, Jesus, he missed his mark. Because I thought, well, if this is the most dangerous man I've witnessed on the political stage in my lifetime, we could put Putin and Netanyahu kind of close to him, and the various North Korean leaders. But Trump is, for people of the progressive tilt or the left, loosely speaking, is is a is a terrifying figure for what he presages for America and for the world. And in Australia, we actually we kind of inhabit the minds of America because we're all so fascinated by what happens in America, like you are in Ireland as well. But then I found myself thinking, well, me thinking that way is part of the problem. Me thinking that way about wishing Trump ill is part of the problem. And it reminded me of when my cousin from Alabama came to Australia just after Trump was elected. And I didn't know she'd voted. I hadn't seen her for 35 years. I didn't know she'd voted for Trump. But Trump had just been elected, and we're driving around Sydney, and I'm showing her the sights of Sydney. And at some point, the presidential election result came up, and I said, "Oh, you didn't vote for Trump, did you?" And she said, "My word, I voted for Trump. I would never, ever, ever vote for that wicked, wicked woman." And I nearly drove off the road. I nearly crashed the car. I screeched to a halt, and I went, "Oh my God, fuck my car." I'm driving around Sydney with a Trumpist, and she's my cousin. Like, I had an amygdala hijack. And my response was exactly what the collective response is to people who don't think like us. How do we build bridges? How do we drop this kind of separation between us? And I think this is a very long way into this idea, but it's like when you go to the west coast of Ireland, or when you go on a yoga retreat, or when you are at a dance. You're dancing for hours, and you're getting into that shamanic, ancient kind of dancing with the drums and the padded feet and the when you access all of this stuff, I think you go beyond the verities of today into something that is much more immutable and permanent. And in that place, it's a kind of there are pagan wisdoms, there's a pantheism, a polytheism, there is the trees whisper, they talk to each other as they do. The birds are alerting each other and you to, sounds of the forest, that everything is alive, everything is fizzing with conversation. There's a conversation going on everywhere if we have the ears and the eyes and the sensibilities for it. And that's partly, again, what Ireland, the West Coast, does for you, because that conversation has never gone away. I'm sorry, that was another interminable ramble.
I just love it. I mean, I'm so proud to hear you respond in that way and to read this article, because that is the intention with which I and my family create this experience. Specifically me too, because I'm a student of international relations, have been since I could first reopen and read the world news section of the Irish Times. I remember I was 12 years old and I was like, the world news, what's this? Just, because the whole rest of the thing was the Irish news. And it was interesting. But the concept of there being news in other countries just blew my mind. And it led me, I've just been obsessed about the concept, how complex life is. I mean, we're born in our families. How complex are the dynamics of each one of our families? You're talking about your cousin in Alabama. That's very complex. But then to think that there are societies and nations, but then to think that there are nations' relationships with each other. That was what really, and then civilizations, over hundreds and hundreds of years. And that really always blew my mind and obsessed me right up until throughout college. I did my master's degree. And really, when I met my wife, Andrea, that's how we met. We met under the auspices of having to share and exchange very important and essential international relations articles after we met, you see, in order to disguise the burning desire we had for each other's company. And so we exchanged all these articles and things we'd written all about international relations, and a lot of stuff about refugees too was interesting. The whole concept of the movement of people as the most basic unit of human statistic is there were 10 people here today and there's 9 people there yesterday. And like there's nothing more irrefutable as a statistic of around the movement of people. And it's always been something that's absolutely fascinated me. And so when I put something like this together, I'm very much creating it as an antidote, as a redress. Seamus Heaney, too, is a great hero of mine and was an extraordinarily important figure in my father's life and in his mission too, which was to share the genius of Ireland with the world. And Heaney talks about that there being 2 orders of knowledge, the poetic and the practical, the poetic and the practical. And Heaney said the frontier between them is there for the crossing. And he talks about the redress of poetry and how poetry, the poetic imagination, the world, the invisible world of the imagination, is there to redress the imbalances in our visible, pragmatic social world. That art is there to redress that, to heal the illness that we inflict upon ourselves in the visible world. We retreat into the imagination to heal ourselves. And so this experience, I see Ireland throughout history has been this beacon, this place that people have gone to heal and to access higher forms of knowing too. I think Ireland's particular genius is around accessing a higher form of knowing, that we have this knowledge, but we know that there's something more than that. And Ireland is a place where you go, it's almost like a postdoctoral, a postgraduate sort of experience that Ireland seems to excel in. And I'm a great believer too that different parts of the world have different things to teach us. They have a different microbiome for us uh, to to consume and to ingest. And the thing about Ireland is it's an invitation for someone to reach a higher form of knowing, a higher form of being. And that is very much intertwined with creativity. So when I see you come to Ireland with us, with your extraordinary vista, your perspective on the harshness of the visible world and of international relations and of gender relations too, and you come to our experience, and then you go back home and you're invited to write something about something, and you say, I'm going to write about that experience that I had in Ireland. And I said to myself, that's exactly what this is for. This is for all the Davids in the world and the Davids within us to come here and to drink from this source in community. And I hope there was no mention of politics during the week when you were in Ireland with us, because we very explicitly tried to model that. I don't say it, but I very explicitly tried to model that there'll be no talk of politics or the world news or the news cycle. And if I ever hear someone talking about it, I won't explicitly dissuade them from doing it, but I'll hold an intention that that type of conversation isn't welcome during that week. And what's more important is that sense of community that, yeah, you could be sitting next to a Trump supporter. You could be sitting next to something worse than a Trump supporter. And yet, that during this week, that's not what we're here for, that there's something else going on. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's right. And what's so much more interesting, actually, than whether they are or they are not a Trump supporter or a Netanyahu supporter is kind of, what do they bleed for? What do they ache for? What, what pain have they been through? What series of losses have they experienced? Or what aspirations have they never had met or fulfilled, that has brought them to the belief system that they have? And so you don't have to relate to them on, do I agree with their politics? It's like, do I see you? Can I see your humanity? Can I see what you ache for? So I actually think that you talk about it being a higher consciousness. I think it's a deeper consciousness. I feel like I don't know whether I come away from Ireland or anywhere with a higher consciousness, but I feel like it takes me, Ireland takes me into depths that I recognize I'm thirsty for. I'm actually, there's a ravaging thirst for the that poetic imagination, that the things that you can't, that idea that the things that you can't see are as true and as real as the things that you can see. And because we live in a world where, it's only true if you can see it. It's only true if you can apply a sort of 100% replicability blind study to it. Whereas there are all of these truths that I think exist that cannot submit to the scientific method. And most of the things that we love cannot submit to the scientific method. How do you measure the love you have for your wife or your children or your country or anything of beauty or that involves love? Beauty is not, all those things belong in the realm of the irrational and the poetic. I remember, one of the questions that made me sit up straight was it actually changed my life. There's a question from the late great John O'Donoghue, and I was listening to one of his recordings, and he said, he was he was kind of riffing on the idea that the Earth has been here for hundreds of millions of years before we were ever here, and before any human ever walked on its generous, loamy surface. Have you ever asked yourself, what does the Earth think of you? I was like, hmm. You mean that idea that that presupposes so many things that you don't normally think about. Like, does the land, does the earth actually have consciousness? Is it asking a literal question of you? Does it register you? Um, and I've thought about that ever since. And what does the earth think of you? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to it, but it's a brilliant question. And because we've done so much damage to the earth, here in Australia, we live with a collective consciousness that's all about the quarry. Australia is a quarry for the world. What we can frack and extract and gouge from the earth. And that idea that, if the earth was as she was for thousands of years before the patriarchy arrived, she was mother. She was the ancestral mother. She was the giver of all life. She was Gaia. She went by many different names in many different cultures. And what men have done to women for centuries is what men have done by and large to the earth. And so what is calling us at this point at this inflection moment in history is to heal the earth and to address the collective violation of women, of our mothers and sisters and daughters over the centuries, who have found themselves on the receiving end of a system. And it is a system. It is a belief system that we can lord it over nature, that we can lord it over women, that the woman is inferior to man, and that the earth is here to be exploited. And I think both run in tandem with the other. And that's another thing that the Irish, you people, give us, the world, is like this apprehension of, in the English speaking world particularly, where you haven't lost sight of the connection to the earth, to the land. The land speaks. It speaks in all sorts of wondrous ways, and if we only have ears for it. And so to leave politics behind and to come and just listen and feel and allow the senses to absorb everything there is. You come away and your biochemistry again is changed. It's altered. You are not the same person.
And to finish up, I want to just read the last couple of paragraphs, and where, yeah, you just to see this creative response to this experience, it's just so heartening, and for me so encouraging and so beautiful. And yeah, I'll just read you say, it's not enough to hear stories such as this and to sip fine malt whiskey at dusk, dipping your lids to George Bernard Shaw in a bar called Doolittle on the Parknasilla estate, then to savour a meal of pan-roasted sea bass and garden vegetables next door in the Pygmalion room while the evening light fades over Kenmare Bay. Parknasilla, where we're staying, was a great retreat of George Bernard Shaw, yeah, whose meditation on gender relations in Pygmalion and My Fair Lady are fascinating to analyse it. Would I not be stated simply listening to Noreen and her boys singing a cappella beside the miraculous waters of St. Michael's Well, feeling the energy lines running from Ballinskelligs to Jerusalem, or listening to Owen plucking his guitar, singing old Irish songs that his mother helped reintroduce to their country, or drinking, in the words of Moley reciting one of his beautiful poems from his collection Early Music, this one called Skylark, where the skylarks beat their wings and a farmer roars his welcome with the words, "Do not underestimate the circumstances that have brought you here." I do not underestimate anything here, but I am still trying to decipher the meaning of it all while relishing the fact that in this often deeply cynical world of ours, there's still a place for wonder, for where fancy can still take flight. We have always found the Irish a bit odd, Winston Churchill once said. They refuse to be English. Thank heavens for that, says David Lezer.
Could you read my stories from now till kingdom come? Because I love the way you read them.
Absolutely honored. Anytime, anywhere.
That was a beautiful reading. Thank you. I heard it differently, in the way that you write a book, and a book is not a book until it finds a reader.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
always hungry for its reader, and then it becomes a book.
And for me, each one of those images for me is a symbol, is a metaphor. You're not talking about me playing a guitar. You are the guitar, and you are the skylark. Um, you are Winston Churchill.
Well, we've got a little bit of Winston Churchill's stardust in us, don't we?
would be
Perish
very that would be very forgiving. I'll tell you. Take 20 Trumps over one Winston Churchill. There you go. we but the yeah, it's just so beautiful to see that poetic response, David, and an absolute honor. Was there anything else in this article that you when you were writing it, you were saying that you were confined, you felt terribly confined to the 1400 words or whatever it was. What is it that you felt you didn't say or that wasn't said in this piece?
Well, I mean, everything that we've talked about
Mm,
thus far, that could have filled it out to at least 5,000 words. Um, but there's no end to this exploration. As we kind of become more and more um, uh, as the world of politics and men and egos and narcissistic personality disorders kind of leave millions, hundreds of millions of people um, alienated, often desperate, often hungry, often marginalized, marooned, scrabbling for the high ground, for a new place to live. As the world goes through these tumultuous times, there will never be a more, and certainly in my lifetime, a more um, potent moment than this to find an antidote for that. So, what I would have written more about is that is that there is a way to kind of salve the pain of the world, because it is painful to observe the world, to participate in this world, to write about this world as I do for a living. It's terribly painful, and there are times when I've wept here at my desk as I've written about the things that I write about as a journalist. Um, so as a personal salve, as a personal antidote, for me, entering the world of Irish poetry and song and the poetic imagination is a huge balm for my soul. And I dare say for many, many, many millions of people. And so, wouldn't it be wonderful to think of this time in history as being Ireland's time? Truly Ireland's time, the gifts that Ireland has that it never lost, despite 700 years of British occupation and brutality, and uh, that that the things that Ireland managed to retain would now be given to the world, bequeathed to the world as a palliative for the times that we live in. And you know, you talk about this beautifully on your retreat, and may it be so.
Thank you so much, David. So appreciate your time, your presence, your friendship, and sharing this crazy journey of life with you. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
Great pleasure, Owen. Great pleasure.